There is a house in Dublin, Ohio, worth $480,000 with my name on the mortgage. I found out from a stranger's review that it sleeps 6 and has excellent parking. My son told his wife I wouldn't check. He was wrong about that. That's where this story ends. Here's where it starts. My son called it a favor. I called it a co-signature. Looking back, we were both right and we were both wrong about what that meant. Tyler had called 2 days before, Tuesday evening. I'd just come in from the yard. He said he and Kayla had been working with a realtor, that they'd found a place in Dublin, that everything looked good but the bank wanted a co-signer. He said it like he'd rehearsed it, the way he used to ask for things as a kid when he'd already thought through my possible objections and tried to address them all in advance. He was 32 years old. He still did that. I told him to bring the paperwork on Saturday. He showed up at 11. Kayla was with him. They both looked the way people look when they've decided something is already decided and are hoping you won't make it a whole thing. Tyler had the folder in his hand before I even got the door all the way open. He handed it over slightly too fast and then said, "We're really excited about this one, Dad. It's got a good yard for Lucas." I said, "Come inside." Kayla made coffee. She'd been to my house enough times to know where things were. She moved through my kitchen with the ease of someone who'd made herself comfortable there, and I didn't mind that. She'd been my daughter-in-law for 4 years. She poured 3 cups without asking and brought them to the table while Tyler sat across from me and watched me open the folder. The mortgage packet was 47 pages. I know because I counted them before I started reading. It's a habit. When I was a civil engineer, 30 years with the county, working on bridge systems and drainage infrastructure, the first thing you do before you review any document is establish its scope. How many pages, what sections, where the signatures are. Not because you distrust the document, because you're going to be responsible for what it says. I started on page 1. Tyler talked for the first few minutes. The neighborhood, the school district, the square footage. He'd done his research. I could tell he was proud of that. I was listening, but I was also reading, and after a while the two things can coexist if you're used to doing them. Kayla said, at some point, light, easy, not unkind. "Dad, it's fine." The realtor explained everything. "You don't have to read every line." I looked up. "Then it won't take long." She smiled and sipped her coffee. Tyler looked at the table. I read every page. There were things worth noting. The adjustable rate clause in section 4. The maintenance obligation language in section 11. On page 12, there was a line about supplemental income reporting, a clause that said if the property generated any rental income, it was to be disclosed to the lender within 60 days of initiation. I read it twice. Tyler was talking about the neighborhood association at that point. The dues were reasonable, the streets were clean, there was a park 2 blocks over. I almost asked about that clause. Page 12. The rental income language. I didn't. Tyler had never rented anything. He'd never expressed any interest in it. I filed the question as probably nothing and moved on. I want to be clear about that moment. Now that I know what came later, I saw it. I noticed it. I made a choice. The choice wasn't naive. I wasn't a man who signed things without reading them. The choice was that I trusted my son. Those are not the same thing. But at the time they felt like they were. I got to page 47. I read the signature block. I set the folder down and I looked at Tyler, and what I felt, I can describe it now because I know the full shape of it, was pride. Not complicated pride. Not the kind you have to qualify. The simple kind. My son was 32. He had a wife, a 6-year-old boy, and a house in a good school district. He was building something. He needed my name on a piece of paper to get started. That's what fathers are for. I reached into my shirt pocket for my pen, the one they gave me at my retirement ceremony 8 years ago. A good pen, heavy, with the county seal engraved near the clip. I'd used it on exactly 4 documents before this one. The deed to my own house, my will, Tyler's baptism records, and a letter I wrote to my father 2 weeks before he died. I used it for things that mattered. Tyler watched me uncap it. I think he understood what the pen meant, even if he didn't say so. He went quiet. I signed where it said co-signer. I initialed the 3 pages that required initials. I handed the folder back to Tyler. He let out a breath, not dramatically, just the small release of someone who'd been carrying tension and could set it down now. He said, "Thanks, Dad." 2 words. He meant them. Kayla said, "We really appreciate this, Dennis. Really." I said I knew they did. We had lunch. Tyler talked about the closing date. Kayla asked if I wanted more coffee. Lucas had stayed home with Kayla's mother that morning, and we talked about him for a while, what he'd been doing in school, a thing he'd said last week that made Tyler laugh. An ordinary Saturday afternoon. They left at 1:30. I watched their car pull out of the driveway. Then I went back inside and sat at my kitchen table for a while with the cups still out. That night, I found a picture frame in the hall closet, the kind with dark wood and a clean mat, wide enough for a standard document. I'd bought it months ago for something I never got around to framing. I printed the first page of the mortgage, the one with Tyler's name and the address and the amount, $480,000. I trimmed it to fit the mat. Then, on a piece of cardstock, I wrote, "Welcome home." My handwriting, square, careful, the kind of handwriting you develop when you spend 30 years marking documents that other people have to read. I put it in the frame that same night. I set it on the kitchen counter and looked at it for a while. I was going to give it to them at the housewarming. I thought it was a good gift. I was right about that, and I was wrong about what I'd get back. Let me tell you why I framed it. It wasn't sentiment, exactly. I'm not a sentimental man in the way people usually mean. I don't keep things because they make me feel good. I keep them because they mean something specific, and I want to be able to point at them and say, that happened, that was real. Some things deserve to be documented outside of a drawer. Some things are worth putting on a wall. My father rented his whole life, not because he couldn't buy, though there were years when he couldn't, but because ownership always seemed like something that happened to other people. I bought my house at 31, paid it off at 53. The deed is in a fireproof box in my hall closet, and sometimes, maybe 3 or 4 times in a decade, I've taken it out just to confirm that it's still there. When Tyler's name went on that mortgage, my name beside it, something completed a circuit I hadn't known was still open. That's why I framed it. I wanted him to have the feeling of it on his wall. Not the debt, the fact of it. I own this. My name is here. This is ours. I wrapped it carefully, in brown paper, the way you wrap something you built yourself. The housewarming was on a Saturday in early November. The drive to Dublin is about 25 minutes from my house. I knew every turn. I'd driven it 3 times already to help Tyler haul furniture from storage during the move. And each time I'd come around the same corner and seen the house and felt the same thing, that particular satisfaction of something being where it belongs. I pulled into the driveway and had barely turned off the engine when I heard the front door open. Lucas came at a full run. He was 6 at the time. 6.5, he would correct you, and he ran the way 6-year-olds run, with his whole body committed to it, arms pumping, complete seriousness on his face, as if arriving at his grandfather was a logistical challenge he'd been training for. I got out of the car and had just straightened up when he made contact. He grabbed my hand with both of his and said, "Grandpa, we have a yard now." I said I'd heard. He pulled me toward the door, and I let him. The house was already full. Tyler's work friends, a couple from their street, Kayla's friend Denise from college, music playing at a decent volume, not too loud, chosen to be comfortable for everyone present, which told me Kayla had put thought into it. She was good at that, good at calibrating rooms. Tyler came out of the kitchen with a beer in each hand and gave me one without asking. He looked relaxed in a way I wasn't used to seeing, the particular ease of a man who has arrived somewhere and stopped bracing for the next thing. He said, "You found it okay?" I said I had been there 3 times already and I found it fine. He laughed. "Right, yeah." While Lucas went to find something to show me, a thing requiring significant retrieval from his room based on the time it took, I walked through the main floor. I do this automatically. It's not inspection so much as orientation. 30 years of infrastructure work trains your eye to read a space, and I can't turn it off any more than a doctor can stop noticing someone's posture. The house was solid. Good bones. The floors were hardwood throughout the main level, original from the look of the wear patterns, which meant the subfloor was likely pre-engineered joists, a sound choice for this part of Ohio. The kitchen had been updated recently, probably in the last 5 years. The windows had double panes. Someone had run the numbers on this house before building it, and the numbers had been run correctly. I walked down the short hallway toward the back bathroom and stopped. The door on the second room from the end, what they were using as a guest room, didn't hang right. You could see it in the gap, wider at the top on the latch side, tighter at the bottom. A door tells you what the frame is doing, and the frame tells you what the wall is doing. This one said the frame had settled, probably unevenly, probably over a few years. Not dangerous, not structural, in the way that matters for occupancy, but worth noting. Tyler came around the corner with a plate of something. I said, "That door there, you'll want to have someone look at the frame." He glanced at it, It always does that. The realtor said it was cosmetic. The frame has shifted, I said. Probably started 2-3 years back. You don't notice it until it's already happened, Tyler said. Yeah, I'll get someone to look at it, in the tone of a man who wasn't going to get someone to look at it. I didn't push, it was his house. But I noted it. I noted it the way I note everything. Not as a problem yet, just as a fact. A door that doesn't hang right means the frame has shifted. It happens slowly. You don't notice until it's already wrong. I thought about that observation, much later, more than once. Lucas came back with a drawing he'd made at school. A bridge, he explained, because Grandpa worked on bridges. He'd used every color available for the bridge itself and grey crayon for the water underneath, which I thought was a sophisticated structural choice. I told him so. He looked pleased with himself in the way children do when an adult treats their work as worth analyzing. We went out to the backyard. It was a good yard. Tyler had been right about that. Flat, well kept, a maple near the back fence already turning. Lucas showed me where he thought they should put a garden, pointing at a specific patch of ground with the authority of someone who had made final decisions. I said the south exposure was good for it, which he accepted as confirmation of his plan. We stayed out there for probably 20 minutes, just the two of us. Lucas talked. I listened. He had opinions about which vegetables were worth growing and which ones weren't. He'd ruled out beets entirely and was on the fence about squash. I told him I'd grown squash once, in the early 90s, and it had taken over half the yard by August. He thought that sounded interesting rather than cautionary, which told me something about him. When we came back in, I went to get my coat from the front room, and I retrieved the package from where I'd left it near the door. I brought it over to where Tyler and Kayla were standing together near the kitchen island and said I had something for the house. Tyler took it and started unwrapping it with the careful hands of someone who isn't sure what he's holding. When he got the paper off and saw the frame, he went quiet. He looked at it for a long moment. The mortgage's first page, his name, the address, $480,000, and in my handwriting below it on the cardstock, "Welcome home." He said, "Dad, just that." I said I thought it belonged on the wall. He looked up, and his face was doing something that took him a moment to get under control. He was touched, genuinely, but there was something else there. Something I caught and then lost again quickly because Kayla reached past him and took the frame and looked at it herself. She said, "That's so thoughtful, Dennis, really." And she smiled. It was a good smile, the kind that reaches your eyes and holds there. Kayla was a warm person in her way. I want to be fair about that because she was. But that smile, in that moment, lasted a half-second longer than it needed to. She was smiling at the frame, and then she was smiling past it, at something I couldn't see. And then it was over, and she was handing it back to Tyler and saying they'd find the perfect place for it. I watched Tyler carry it to the hallway and prop it against the wall where they'd presumably hang it later. I didn't know standing there what the extra half-second meant. I noted it the same way I noted the door. A fact, not yet a problem. The party went another 2 hours. I helped Tyler clear dishes. I said goodbye to people I'd met once and would probably meet again. I hugged Lucas, who was half asleep on the couch by then, and told him the squash needed at least 8 hours of sun. He nodded seriously without opening his eyes. Tyler walked me to my car. He said, "Thanks for coming, and for, everything." I said, "Of course." The drive home was 25 minutes. The roads were quiet. I had the radio off. I thought about that smile the whole way back. I pulled into my driveway and sat there for a moment before going inside. The note I'd written, "Welcome home," my handwriting, was already on their wall, or would be soon. I'd meant every word of it. I filed the smile under, probably nothing. I was almost right about that. The strangers were polite. They offered me coffee. I said no thank you. I have no idea why I remember that, the coffee offer, but I do. It was a Sunday in late September. Not the first Sunday I'd been over since the housewarming, but maybe the 7th or 8th. Tyler and I had a standing arrangement that went back years. I'd come by on Sunday mornings, usually around 9:30, sometimes with something for Lucas, sometimes just myself. It was informal. That was the point. When Tyler was growing up, Sunday mornings were the only time I didn't have a project to finish or a report to file. We'd sit in the kitchen together. He'd show me his homework. I'd read the paper. Nothing was required of either of us, and somehow that made it the most reliable part of the week. After he married Kayla and bought the house, I kept it going. You don't let the rituals drop just because the geography changes. I don't think Tyler ever asked me to keep coming. I don't think he needed to. It was just a thing we both understood, that Sunday mornings were still Sunday mornings, no matter what else shifted. That particular Sunday, I had a book for Lucas in the front seat of my car, a coffee table book about bridges, not written for children technically, but Lucas had started asking questions about how things were built. He'd seen something on television about suspension cables and wanted to know if you could drive a truck across a bridge made of rope. I told him it depended on the rope. He thought about that for a moment and then changed the subject, but the curiosity stayed. 2 weeks later, he was asking me how they anchored the cables of the Golden Gate into the rock on the shore. I didn't have the exact specifications, which bothered me more than it should have. So when I found the book at a shop downtown, hardcover, 600 pages, full-color photographs, and engineering cross-sections going back to the Roman arch bridges, I bought it without deliberating. That Saturday night, I set it on the passenger seat so I wouldn't forget it. The drive over was ordinary, clear sky, September light, still warm but with the quality of a season preparing to change. The roads had that particular Sunday morning emptiness, quiet without being deserted, the kind of stillness that means everyone is still home making coffee rather than out in the world. If I was thinking about anything in particular, about a drainage consultation I'd been asked to do, a retired colleague with a problem in a culvert near a retention pond. Nothing urgent, just a favor I was glad to give. I wasn't thinking about Tyler or Kayla or the house. I was not at that point worried about anything. I pulled into their driveway at 9:41. I noticed the time because I also noticed the car parked along the curb, a blue sedan, older, out-of-state plates. Ohio registration stickers are a particular color, and this wasn't it. I registered the detail the way you register most things when you've spent 3 decades doing structural assessments. Not as a cause for concern, just as a data point, a variation from baseline, something to note. I picked up the book from the passenger seat. I went to the door and knocked. Kayla answered. She was dressed, not in the way she'd dress at home on a normal Sunday, but in the way you dress when you want guests to think well of you. Neat blouse, hair done, the kind of presentable you perform for people who don't know you yet. She smiled when she saw me, and the smile arrived about a half second before I thought it should. Not much, the kind of timing you'd never notice unless you were paying attention. "Dennis," she said, "come in." I came in. There were 2 people at the kitchen table, a man and a woman, both somewhere in their 40s, with the comfortable traveling look of people who had been somewhere for a night or two and were in no hurry. Plates in front of them, eggs, I believe, and toast, coffee cups half full. The man stood up slightly when I entered, a reflex of courtesy, the kind that gets trained into you early and stays. The woman smiled in the easy way of someone expecting a pleasant morning. "These are our guests," Kayla said, and she gave me their names, 2 names that I registered and did not retain. "They're in from Michigan. We've been doing Airbnb on weekends. I don't know if I mentioned that." She said it the way you say something you know you haven't said, but with enough ease that it filled the space where a question might have formed. "Just weekends, it helps with the mortgage." The strangers were looking at me. I realized I hadn't said anything, not as a performance. I was not making a point. I simply had not yet found the words, because the words had not caught up to what was happening. There was a small gap between what Kayla had just said and everything I understood about the house, about the loan, about the arrangement we had made, and I was standing in that gap looking for solid ground. The woman with the coffee asked if I'd like some. I said no thank you. I have thought about that exchange more times than makes any practical sense. The offer, my refusal, 2 polite strangers who had paid to be there, who knew nothing about the name on the mortgage and no reason they should, being perfectly courteous in a house that was, in a legal sense, also mine. I don't hold anything against them. They were just travelers looking for a place to sleep on a weekend in September. They had nothing to do with any of it. "Well," I said. I looked at Kayla. Her expression was still smooth. Whatever she'd expected from this moment, she'd prepared for it. "I won't interrupt. I just came to drop this off for Lucas." I held up the book. She took it with both hands and said it was lovely and that he would love it. I said I hope so. I smiled. The strangers smiled. Kayla smiled. I left. I walked back to my car and sat down. I set my hands on the steering wheel. I did not start the engine immediately. I don't know exactly how long I sat there, not more than a minute. Long enough for the details to arrange themselves into something I could look at. The out-of-state plates. The way Kayla had said, "I don't know if I mentioned that," rather than "I should have mentioned that." The fact that I had co-signed a $480,000 mortgage and had not been told that the property was being rented to strangers on weekends. Not because I was necessarily owed that information. I'm not a lawyer and I hadn't thought through the legal details yet. but because I am an engineer, and an engineer notices when something was not disclosed, whether the absence was an oversight or a choice. The drive home is 11 minutes. I have made it many times and the route doesn't vary much. On that particular morning, I counted those minutes one by one. Not obsessively, I wasn't watching the clock with any urgency, but I noted each minute as it turned the way you note a measurement when you want to make sure you haven't missed one. 1, 2, 3. I wasn't angry. I want to be clear about that because I've thought about how to describe what I felt, and anger isn't the right word. It was something quieter, a sensation of background noise that suddenly becomes identifiable, not louder, just defined. The way you sometimes hear a sound in a building for weeks before you realize it's a pipe that hasn't been sitting right. 4, 5, 6. I went inside, made lunch, read through the drainage notes, watched part of a game in the afternoon without retaining much of it, had dinner, washed the dishes. The evening passed the way evenings do when your mind is working on something underneath the surface of everything else. 7, 8, 9, 10. 11. I opened my laptop at 10:43 that night. I typed the address into the county property search. I wasn't sure what I was looking for, but I knew how to look. I found it at 11:47 on a Tuesday night. I wasn't looking for it. That distinction matters to me, so I'll say it plainly. I did not go looking for a listing. I was not in a suspicious frame of mind, scrolling through Airbnb the way someone might scroll through an ex-partner's social media in the dark. I had opened the county property search because it was the logical next step after Sunday. I am a methodical person. When I encounter something I don't understand, I go to the primary source and I look at the record. That's what the county system is, the record. Who owns what, and under what terms, and what has been filed against it. I had been on the county site for perhaps 40 minutes. There wasn't much that surprised me. The deed was clean, the mortgage recorded correctly, my name where I expected it. What I found at 11:47 was the result of a different search, a tangential one. I had typed the street address into a general search engine out of habit, the way you do when you want to see what the world says about a thing before you decide what to say yourself. The third result was the listing. I clicked on it. The headline read, "Charming Dublin home, walkable to shops, ideal for families." There was a photograph at the top, the front of the house, taken on a bright morning, with the door painted the particular shade of soft green that Kayla had chosen and that Tyler had painted himself over a long weekend in April. I had helped him tape the trim. I remembered that. I remembered that we'd ordered lunch from a place down the road and eaten it sitting on the front steps, and he'd told me about a project Kayla was excited about, something entrepreneurial, and I'd said it sounded good without asking for details. I scrolled through the photos. The kitchen, the one where the strangers had been eating eggs on Sunday. The living room, with the fireplace that I had noted during the housewarming, had a hairline crack in the mortar above the firebox that someone would want to address before winter. The upstairs hallway, the guest room, made up with clean linens and a small plant on the dresser, and folded towels arranged the way you see them in hotels. The description said, 2-story single-family home in sought-after Dublin school district, guest suite on 2nd floor with private bath, full kitchen access, quiet neighborhood. Host is available by message. I read the amenities section, high-speed internet, parking for 2 vehicles, washer and dryer, coffee maker. I noted, without particular feeling, that the coffee maker was the one I had given Tyler and Kayla as a housewarming present. It was described as a premium drip coffee system. I scrolled to the reviews. There were 78 of them. I sat with that number for a moment. 78. The listing had been live since late May. I could see the date in the footer of the page. That was 4 months. 4 months of guests. 4 months of bookings. 4 months of Airbnb processing transactions on a property my name was attached to. I did the arithmetic the way I do all arithmetic, methodically, with conservative assumptions. The listing showed a nightly rate of $89. I assumed a weekend occupancy rate of roughly 70%, which is on the low end for a well-reviewed listing in a school district suburb in a mid-sized city. 2 nights per weekend, 70% of weekends across 4 months. That's approximately 14 booked weekends. At $89 per night, 2 nights, call it $2,500 in nightly revenue. Add the cleaning fee the listing charged, $45 per stay, and you add another $630. Rough total for 4 months, somewhere in the range of $3,100 to $3,400. I used $3,200 as my working figure. An engineer gets quiet when he finds a load-bearing mistake. Not loud, not demonstrative, quiet. in the way that a structure gets quiet just before something in it decides it has held enough weight. The calculation wasn't what made me quiet. The calculation was just a calculation. What made me quiet was understanding, in the same moment, that this had been going on for 4 months and no one had considered it worth mentioning. Not Tyler, who knew I came by most Sundays. Not Kayla, who had been running the bookings and managing the guests and collecting the payments. Not once, in 7 or 8 Sunday morning visits, had either of them said, "We wanted to let you know, we've been doing something with the upstairs." Instead, Kayla had told me on the morning she'd been caught mid-breakfast with guests already at the table, and she'd told me as though it were a detail she'd simply forgotten to mention, the same way you might forget to mention that you'd repainted the guest room. I read through a portion of the reviews, not all 78. I didn't need all of them for the purpose I was beginning to understand I had, but enough to establish a pattern. The guests consistently mentioned the host's responsiveness, the cleanliness of the space, and the good value for the area. One reviewer mentioned that the host had been flexible about check-in time when their flight was delayed. Another noted that the house was better than the photos, $3,200 a month. The mortgage payment on a $480,000 home in Columbus, Ohio at the rate Tyler had locked. I had been there when he locked it. I had read every page of the closing documents, was just under $2,800 a month in principal and interest, before taxes and insurance. I did not need a calculator to understand what that meant. I opened a new spreadsheet. I named the file something simple, a string of numbers, the date and the property address. Nothing that would be unclear to me or to anyone I might eventually share it with. I created 3 columns. Column A, date. Column B, amount. Column C, evidence. I started with the listing creation date. I pulled the nightly rate from the listing, the cleaning fee, the listed availability calendar for as many weeks back as the platform showed. I cross-referenced each weekend against my own Sunday visit records. I keep a calendar. I have kept one for decades. It is a habit from working in county infrastructure where accountability is measured in dates and signatures. For each weekend I had visited, I noted whether guests had been present or whether I had seen evidence of recent guests. For each weekend in the calendar I had not visited, I used the conservative occupancy estimate I had already calculated. I worked steadily. I did not hurry. I did not let the numbers carry any weight beyond what they actually were, which was data. A data set that described a situation. The situation would require a response. The response would require documentation. Documentation required accuracy. Accuracy required patience. By 11:59 I had 14 entries. By 12:43 I had 31. By 1:17 in the morning I had 47 entries, and my eyes were beginning to have difficulty with the screen. I saved the file, backed it to the external drive I keep on the desk, and went to bed. In the morning I made coffee. I read the paper for about 20 minutes, which is my habit. At 7:52 I called Tyler. He answered on the second ring, which meant he was already up and moving. He said, "Hey Dad," in the easy, distracted voice of a man who was probably making his own breakfast or looking at his phone. I asked how he was doing. He said, "Fine, busy week at work." I asked how Kayla was. He said, "Good, she'd been busy too." I asked how Lucas was. He said Lucas was great. Lucas had lost another tooth. They were thinking about getting him a new backpack for school. I said that sounded good. I said, "Give my best to everyone." He said he would. I hung up. I opened the spreadsheet and added a note in column C for that morning's entry. Subject unaware of documentation. Communication tone, normal. Then I poured the rest of my coffee and went to sit at the table, and I thought about what I still needed to find, because I had a sense, not yet confirmed, that the Airbnb listing was not the whole of it. It was the part I had found first. There is usually a part you find second. I had a system. And when you have a system, you don't deviate from it. Not when you're angry. Especially not when you're angry. I found it because Tyler CC'd me on a bank statement by mistake. He meant to forward it to Kayla. He got me instead. It came in at 2:17 in the afternoon on a Wednesday. I was at the kitchen table going through utility invoices. I keep a paper folder for those, always have. And my phone buzzed with a new email. I glanced at the subject line, FWD, October statement, checking X 4471. The sending address was Tyler's. The recipient line showed my address and what I assumed was Kayla's, though I didn't look closely at first. I almost deleted it without opening it. That's the part I've thought about since. One tap, and I would have missed the whole thing. I don't know what the following months would have looked like if I'd done that. Cleaner, probably. Also wrong. I opened the email because I thought Tyler had sent it on purpose. I thought maybe there was a question about the mortgage, some payment discrepancy he wanted my eyes on. We had never discussed the account in detail. I was a co-signer, not a co-owner, but it wasn't impossible, so I opened it. The statement was from October, standard checking account summary, nothing unusual on the surface. I was about to close it when I noticed the thread beneath the forwarded message, the original email chain Tyler had pulled from before forwarding. I almost missed it again. But engineers don't skim, we read. I scrolled up. The thread was 3 weeks old. It started with Kayla asking Tyler whether the October Airbnb deposit had cleared. She listed a figure I recognized from my own documentation, column B, row 31. Tyler confirmed it had. Then Kayla asked a follow-up. Should we move the business account transfer before the end of the month? I don't want anything sitting where Dennis can see it. Tyler's reply was 4 words. Don't worry about it. And then a line below that, the part I read twice. Dad won't check. 3 words. I set my phone down on the table. I set it face down, which I never do. I keep it face up, so I can see notifications. Old habit. But I set it face down, and I left my hand on top of it for a moment. The way you might rest your hand on a document you're not sure you want to look at again. I've been asked since whether I was angry. People want to know about the anger. It's a reasonable question. What I felt in that moment was not anger. Anger is a hot thing. It rises, it wants to be expressed. What I felt was something much quieter than anger, and much more durable. I had spent 30 years working in county infrastructure. In that work, the worst errors were never the ones that were dramatic, not the collapses, not the floods. The worst errors were the ones that happened because someone, somewhere, looked at a structural system and decided the other party wouldn't notice, wouldn't check, wasn't paying attention. Those errors get built into systems, they compound, and then at some point they become the structure itself, and you can't remove them without tearing everything down. Dad won't check. It wasn't that my son had made a mistake. It wasn't even that he had made a decision that cost me something. It was that he had looked at me, at 30 years of never skimming, at a man who had read every page of a contract before signing it, and decided I wasn't paying attention. He hadn't stolen from me, he'd written me off. I read the 3 words one more time. Then I took a screenshot. I took a screenshot of the full thread, the part where Kayla asked about moving the transfer, and the part where Tyler told her not to worry, and the 3 words at the end that I didn't need to read a 3rd time to remember. I closed the email. I put my phone in my pocket. Then I drove to Lucas's school. I was early, 20 minutes early, which meant I sat in the parking lot with the engine off and watched other parents arrive and find spots and check their own phones. The school has a painted pickup lane at the front. Yellow curb, painted footprints where the kids are supposed to stand, and after a few minutes the doors opened and children began streaming out. Some of them ran, some of them walked in the careful way that children walk when they're carrying something. Lucas came out carrying a folder. He spotted my car before I opened the door, and by the time I was standing outside he had already covered half the distance between us, in a half run that became a full run in the last few steps. He talked for the entire drive home. Something about a science project. His teacher had asked the class to design a bridge out of popsicle sticks, and Lucas had decided his would be a suspension bridge, which the teacher had said was ambitious, which Lucas took as encouragement rather than a caution. I asked him what made him choose a suspension bridge. He said, because it hangs. And if you hang it right, it can hold more weight than the ones that just sit there. I told him he was right about that. He said, do you know how they work, Grandpa? I told him I did. I listened to him talk for 22 minutes. Not as a distraction. I've thought about that too. The question of whether I was using my grandson as something to put between myself and what I'd just read. I don't think that's what it was. I think it was something simpler. I knew what I had found, and I knew what I was going to do about it. And in the meantime, there was a 6-year-old in my back seat explaining the load dynamics of suspension bridges with the confidence of someone who has just discovered a thing and wants to share it before it stops being new. I drove. I listened. I answered his questions. That part was easy. That part was the most honest thing I did all day. That night, I updated column C, evidence item 48. Screenshot of email thread. Tyler to Kayla, October 14th. Dad won't check. File name, TK Calloway _48_text_oct14.png. Logged with timestamp and source. Evidence item 49, October bank statement. Forwarded in error. Evidence items 50, 51, and 52. Cross-references to business account transfers I had documented in column B over the previous 3 weeks, now confirmed against the statement figures. 52 items, 9 categories, every one of them time-stamped. That same evening I called Marlene. I hadn't told her the full scope yet, just that I'd been doing some paperwork, looking into things. Marlene is my older sister by 4 years, and she has never in her life let me get away with a vague answer if she suspected a specific one was available, so I knew the moment she heard my voice that the conversation was going to go somewhere real. I told her about the text thread. I read it to her exactly as Tyler had written it. There was a pause. Then Marlene said, "She can't just do that. You co-signed their house, Dennis. Your name is on that loan. She's using you like a tool, and Tyler is standing there letting her. Tell me you're going to do something about this." Her voice was warm even in the outrage. That's the thing about Marlene. She gets angry the way some people get concerned. It's the same frequency, just louder. I said, "I know, Marlene." She said, "Don't I know me? Are you listening to yourself?" "I know, Marlene." "What does that mean?" "Does that mean you're—" "How's the garden?" I asked. A short silence. "Dennis, the tomatoes," I said. "Last time we talked you were having trouble with the tomatoes." Another pause, and then I heard her exhale, the sound of someone who has known me long enough to understand that when I change the subject is already handled. "The tomatoes are fine," she said. "I put in a stake, they needed something to lean on." "Good," I said. We talked for another 20 minutes about the garden. When I hung up, the kitchen was quiet. I sat at the table for a while with the folder closed in front of me. Then I put it away and did the dishes. I had 3 more weeks of documentation to do. I wasn't done. The Airbnb income was a grey area. At least that's what I told myself. For 3 weeks I had been documenting it, methodically, accurately, without prejudice, and somewhere in the back of my mind I had maintained a small, careful distance between what I was recording and what it meant. The Airbnb had been running without my knowledge and without a city permit. It was generating income on a property that bore my name. Those were facts. Whether they constituted a breach serious enough to act on was, in my own private assessment, still a question. I am not a man who acts on questions. What I found on a Thursday morning in October was not a grey area. It was routine documentation. I had been working through the county public records portal. I had used it for 30 years in my career, knew its layout the way you know a road you've driven 1,000 times, and on this particular morning I was cross-referencing the property address against any filed permits or registered business activity that might bear on my documentation. Columbus County's business filing database is public. Most people don't know that. Most people don't have a reason to. I searched the address. The first result was a short-term rental registration filed 6 months ago. Incomplete, no city permit attached. I had already documented that. I moved to the next result. The second result was a business entity registration, Harper Home Solutions, LLC. I stopped. Harper is Kayla's maiden name. I clicked through to the filing. The registration date was 8 months ago, 2 months before the Airbnb listing went live, 4 months after closing. The registered agent was listed as Kayla R. Harper, Calloway. The business address was the house, Tyler and Kayla's house, the house on which my name appeared as co-signer on a $480,000 mortgage. I read the description of business purpose, residential property investment and short-term rental management. I sat with that for a moment. Then I pulled the attached financing documents. A business loan had been filed in conjunction with the LLC. The filing referenced a secured asset as collateral. The collateral was listed as the primary residence at the registered address, the address I had just read, the mortgage on that property. My mortgage, not Tyler's mortgage, not Kayla's mortgage. The mortgage where my name appears on page 1, page 3, and every place a co-signer's name is required to appear. The mortgage I had read every page of before I signed it. I had co-signed a residential mortgage. I had not co-signed an LLC. I had not agreed to serve as collateral security for a business venture. I had not been asked. I had not been informed. At no point between the LLC registration 8 months ago and this Thursday morning in October had anyone, not Tyler, not Kayla, not the lender, not anyone, contacted me about this. My name had been used. My asset had been pledged. My signature, given 18 months ago for one specific purpose, had been extended to cover something I had never seen. I closed the filing portal. I opened a new browser tab. I typed, "Unauthorized encumbrance cosigner rights Ohio." The legal definition took me 4 minutes to locate and read. I read it twice. Then I read the relevant statute once more, slowly, the way I read the mortgage documents at my kitchen table while Kayla made coffee and Tyler shifted in his seat. The term is unauthorized encumbrance. It means using a co-signed or jointly titled property as collateral for a loan or obligation without the consent of all parties whose names appear on the title or financing documents. It is not a grey area. I sat at my desk for a while after that. I want to be accurate about what that time was. It was not deliberation. I had already decided in the same quiet way that a structure fails, not all at once, but in the moment when the last load-bearing element gives way and the calculation resolves. 3 weeks of a grey area, and then a Thursday morning that wasn't. I was not angry. I had moved past the place where anger would have been useful. What I felt, and I am choosing this word carefully, the way I choose all my words, was clarity. The kind of clarity that comes after you have been uncertain for long enough that the uncertainty itself begins to feel dishonest. I had been uncertain because I wanted to be fair. I had wanted to allow for the possibility that I was misreading the situation, that there was context I didn't have, that Tyler and Kayla had intended to tell me and simply hadn't found the right moment. Engineers do this too. We check our measurements twice before we report a finding, because a finding means something has to change, and change has consequences. I had checked my measurements multiple times, over multiple weeks. The finding was accurate. I opened a new document. I added item 53 to column C, LLC Filing, Harper Home Solutions, registered 8 months prior, collateral, co-signed mortgage, no co-signer consent documented, filed under EN Sue Emberint. I added items 54, 55, and 56. The business loan filing, the financing attachment, the registered agent documentation, 56 items, 10 categories. The spreadsheet was complete, not the documentation. I had always known there would be more of that, but the shape of the thing was now complete. I could see the full outline of it, the way you can see the full outline of a structural failure once you've identified every compromised element. It doesn't surprise you anymore. It simply confirms what you'd already suspected. I saved the file. I backed it up to the external drive I keep in the desk drawer. I printed one copy and placed it in the Manila folder beside the others. Then I picked up my phone. I called Arthur Webb. At some point while I waited for him to answer, I thought about the LLC name, Harper Home Solutions, and the thing that struck me, in that detached way that things strike you when you are past the point of feeling them, was the word solutions, as if the house were a problem, as if what it needed was to be managed. I had signed my name to that house because I believed in my son, because I thought that was what fathers did. I had not thought of it as a problem to be solved. Arthur picked up on the second ring. He always did. Arthur Webb has known me for 22 years. He is not a dramatic man. When I finished, he said nothing for 40 seconds. I counted. I had called Arthur on a Thursday morning in October. He picked up on the second ring. He always did. I said, "Arthur, it's Dennis. Are you free tomorrow morning?" He said yes without asking why. That was the nature of 22 years. When you've known a person long enough and they call in a certain register, you don't ask. You just say yes and clear the morning. His office is on the 5th floor of a building at Tokens that I've always found slightly too tall for Dublin. He has a window that faces west, and on clear days you can see the tops of the sycamores lining the block, their pale bark catching the morning light. There are no family photographs on the walls. Arthur's theory is that clients don't need to be reminded that you have things to lose. Instead, there are certificates, and a wooden clock his father made, and one framed photograph. The two of us at a retirement dinner 8 years ago. I'm holding a plaque I don't know what I did with. He's laughing at something I said. He kept the photograph. That tells you something about Arthur Webb. He was standing when I came in, another habit of his. He shook my hand before I sat down. He asked how Lucas was. I told him Lucas had made the reading list at his school, which was apparently a thing that happened now, and Arthur said that sounded like Dennis Calloway's grandson. I said I'd pass that along. Then I sat down. I put the file on his desk. It was not a file I had assembled quickly. It was 73 pages, including the spreadsheet printout, the business entity filing, the relevant sections of the mortgage agreement, the annotated screenshots, and a one-page summary I had written at the top that covered the facts, in order, with no editorial commentary. Arthur is a man who prefers to arrive at his own conclusions. I had given him the materials. The conclusions were his to make. He put on his glasses. He looked at the one-page summary first. I watched his eyes go across it twice, which was not unusual for Arthur, who I have seen read the same paragraph 4 times when he thought there might be something in it. Then he opened the file. He went through it methodically. He didn't ask questions. He didn't say anything. He turned pages. I have sat in a lot of quiet rooms. I spent 30 years in rooms where the silence meant something was being calculated, assessed, weighed. This was that kind of quiet. Not uncomfortable, not awkward, productive. When he closed the file, he set it flat on his desk. He looked at the window for a moment. I counted. 1, 2, 3. I got to 40 before he turned back to me. He said, "What do you want, Dennis? Justice or your name off that paper?" I said, "Both." He looked at me over the top of his glasses. That is one of Arthur's more eloquent gestures. It means, I've been doing this for 30 years and I'm trying to decide whether you understand what you're asking for. I let him look. I had been thinking about this question, or something like it, for 3 weeks. I had run through the permutations the way I run through structural calculations, systematically, eliminating the options that fail under load. I knew what I wanted. I also knew that what I wanted was not the same thing as what I felt. They are not always the same thing. Arthur put his glasses down on the desk. He said, "I can get you both. Here's how." Whiz, he was measured. He walked me through what the file contained. From a legal standpoint, not asking if I already knew because he understood I did. He was translating, taking the documentation I had built in the language of an engineer and rendering it in the language of a court. The formal notice, he explained, was the first and most important instrument, a demand letter drafted on his letterhead, specifying the unauthorized use of the co-signed property, the Airbnb operation conducted without co-signer consent, and the filing that listed the mortgaged address as collateral without my knowledge or authorization. The notice would demand that Tyler and Kayla cease the rental operation, dissolve the unauthorized business encumbrance, and refinance the mortgage to remove my name within 90 days. He noted the IRS threshold. He said it in passing, briefly, the way a doctor might mention a blood pressure reading that is elevated but not yet in the danger zone. He said that Airbnb was required to issue 1099-K forms for accounts above the threshold, which their earnings almost certainly crossed, and that this created an entirely separate exposure they would need to address, but that was their problem, not mine, and he was not going to involve me in it. He was telling me it existed, so I understood the full weight of what they had done. He was not recommending I pursue it. I agreed with him. He mentioned the short-term rental permit. Columbus requires them. He said that was something the city could pursue if they chose to, and that if I wanted to flag it, I could. He paused. I said I didn't want to flag it. He nodded. He made a note. He mentioned the unauthorized encumbrance, the business entity using the co-signed property as collateral without my consent. He said that was the clearest legal violation in the file, and that it would be the centerpiece of the formal notice. It was, he said, not a gray area. I said, "I know." Then he closed his legal pad. He said the notice would likely produce one of two outcomes. Either they would comply, refinance within 90 days, dissolve the encumbrance, or they would not comply, and we would escalate. He said that in his experience, a documented, properly framed formal notice resolved approximately 80% of these situations before they required additional action. He said, "They have a clear incentive to comply. The documentation you've built makes this straightforward." I said, "I know." He looked at me for a moment. Then he said, "This is a good file, Dennis." I said, "I had time." He smiled. He understood that I was not making a joke. We talked for a few more minutes. Procedural things, timeline, what he would need from me to finalize the drafting. He said he could have a draft to me by Tuesday. I said that worked. I want to say something about Arthur Webb that is difficult to say without it sounding like more than it is. Arthur is not a man who performs concern. He has been a lawyer for 30 years, and he has seen every version of a bad situation that family money and family trust can produce. He is not surprised by betrayal. He has never been surprised by betrayal, as far as I can tell. But he is, and this matters, he is still precise about it. He still treats the file with the same care, regardless of who is in it. When I set that file on his desk, I didn't know what I needed. I had spent 3 weeks building something I believed in. I had documented, organized, cross-referenced. I had done the work, but documentation is not the same as knowing your footing. You can have every fact in order and still feel, in some corner of yourself, that you are walking on uncertain ground. When Arthur closed the file and said, "I can get you both," what I felt was not relief. Exactly. It was more specific than relief. It was the feeling of knowing that the structure would hold, that I had built the thing correctly, and someone with the tools to assess it had assessed it and found it sound. That is what I needed. We shook hands at the door. His grip was the same as it has been for 22 years. Firm, brief, honest. Arthur said, "Give my best to Lucas." I said, "I will." I meant it. The notice was 4 pages. Arthur drafted it. I read every word, naturally, and suggested 3 changes. He made 2 of them. The draft arrived in my inbox at 9:47 on a Tuesday morning. Arthur sends things when they're ready and does not announce them in advance. I poured a second cup of coffee and sat down at my desk. 4 pages. Clean. The language was precise. Legal precision is not the same thing as my kind of precision, but I have learned over the years to read it the way I learned to read soil survey reports. Slowly, looking for load-bearing statements and structural gaps. I read it twice before I picked up a pencil. The first change I suggested was a date clarification. Arthur had written a range. I wanted a specific date. The date I had confirmed the Airbnb listing was live. He agreed. The second change was a clause in the LLC section that I felt was ambiguous. It could have been read as challenging the existence of the LLC rather than the unauthorized use of the property as collateral. Those are different claims. The first is their business. The second is mine. Arthur agreed, and he tightened the language. The third change I suggested was a sentence in the closing paragraph that I thought was harsher than necessary. He kept it. He told me it was the standard formulation and that softening it actually reduced the legal weight. I deferred to him. He knows that terrain better than I do. There are things I chose not to include in the notice. Arthur had mentioned the IRS threshold exposure. He had given me the option of referencing it in the formal notice, not as a threat, but as a disclosed fact of record, something that established the full scope of the situation. I thought about it for a day. Then I told him to leave it out. I thought about the LLC suit, the possibility of pursuing a civil claim for unauthorized encumbrance rather than simply demanding it be dissolved. Arthur said I had grounds. I believed him. I told him to leave it out. I thought about Kayla's text messages, the ones I had found in the thread Tyler had accidentally sent me. They were documented. They would have been relevant. I told Arthur I wanted nothing in the notice that read as personal. No quoted communications, no emotional material, just the documented violations and the demand. Arthur asked me once if I was sure. I said yes. There is a kind of precision that is punitive, that uses accuracy as a weapon, that includes everything it can include because inclusion is power. I understand that instinct. I didn't feel it was right. What I wanted was the minimum necessary to accomplish what I needed, my name off that paper, the clearest path between where I was and where I needed to be. Anything beyond that was not revenge exactly, more like noise. I don't like noise. When you're engineering a structure, you use the materials required for the load. You don't add more because you have them available. More is not always better. More is sometimes just more weight. I told Arthur, minimum necessary. He said, I thought you'd say that. He sent the revised draft that afternoon. I printed it at home that evening, read it one more time. Then I put it in the envelope Arthur had prepared, his letterhead, his return address, and sealed it. He had explained that the mailing needed to be documented, certified mail, return receipt requested. He walked me through the process clearly. The next morning I drove to the Kaufman Road branch post office. It was a Wednesday, mid-morning, which I had learnt over the years was the window when the lines were shortest. The clerk at window 3 was a woman I recognized from maybe a dozen transactions over the past few years. She had grey-streaked hair pulled back efficiently, and the manner of someone who has worked that window long enough that she has a particular kind of efficient warmth, the kind that comes from doing the same thing well for a long time and finding some satisfaction in that. She slid the certified mail form across to me without being asked. I filled it out. I handed her the envelope. She weighed it. 4 pages, standard envelope, not heavy. She stamped it. She gave me the receipt and the tracking number. I put the receipt in my wallet. She said, "Anything else today?" I said, "No thank you." I was almost to the door when I heard my name. Not my name, a greeting. "Excuse me, sir." I turned. She was a woman I didn't recognize immediately, then placed. A neighbor from Tyler's street. I had seen her at the housewarming, briefly, one of the neighbors Tyler and Kayla had invited. She was carrying a package and smiling. She said she thought she recognized me. Weren't we neighbors? I said I was a visitor, mostly, and that the folks at that address were my family. She smiled warmly and said, "Oh, of course." She knew that couple, the nice young couple next door, so busy lately, always coming and going. She said, So much going on over there. You know, they must have guests every other weekend. It's like they run a little inn." She laughed. She said it was nice to see some energy in the neighborhood. I thanked her. I said I'd pass along her regards. She didn't know she was talking to the cosigner. She didn't know that the envelope I had just mailed was addressed to that nice young couple. She didn't know anything, and she had no reason to. The world contained this situation in a very small space. Arthur's office, my desk, the inside of a certified mail envelope on its way across Columbus. The rest of the world was going about its business. People had packages to mail. Neighbors were friendly. The world didn't know what I knew. I drove to Lucas's school. He came out the double doors the way he always does, backpack pulling slightly to the right because he packs it wrong and refuses to be corrected on this point. He spotted my car and broke into a partial run, the kind that isn't quite running but is faster than walking and involves some arm movement. He climbed in and dropped his backpack on the floor. He said, "Grandpa, look, it was a drawing from art class. Watercolors, a house, a tree, what I believe was a dog, though I chose not to ask and risk the explanation. In the top corner, in the way children place things in top corners, there was a small yellow circle that was the sun. He had written his name along the bottom edge in pencil, Lucas." I looked at it for a moment. I said, "That's a good house." He said, "It has a dog." I said I could see that. I put the drawing in my car visor. It went in without any ceremony. I just slid it in, angled so it would stay. He buckled his seatbelt. We talked about his day. He had apparently beaten someone in a spelling round, a fact he reported with measured satisfaction that reminded me, despite everything, of someone. On the drive home, I thought about something. I don't know if I was protecting Tyler. The notice was measured. The approach was restrained. I chose the minimum necessary. I told myself it was about clarity, about keeping the action clean and purposeful. But I think about Lucas putting his backpack in wrong every time. And I think about not correcting him because some things he needs to figure out himself. And I think about a drawing of a house with a dog in the visor over my head. I think I was protecting Lucas. There's a difference. If I had used everything I had, the IRS exposure, the civil suit, the full weight of what was documented and what was available, I would have done more damage. Not just to Tyler, to the structure Lucas lives inside. The structure I still have my name adjacent to, regardless of what any notice says. I could be precise, I could be clean, I could do what was necessary and leave what wasn't. I think that's what I did. I got home, made dinner, something simple, nothing I had to think about. The drawing stayed in the visor. I didn't move it. The phone didn't ring for 11 days. Tyler called at 7:14 on a Tuesday evening. I was eating dinner. I let it ring twice before I answered. Not because I needed to think about what to say. I already knew what I was going to say. I'd known it for 11 days, which was how long the notice had been sitting on a desk somewhere in Dublin, Ohio. I let it ring twice because I was eating pot roast that Marlene had dropped off the Sunday before, and I'd reheated it, and I wasn't going to let the pot roast get cold for a phone call I had already rehearsed in my head. I pressed accept on the second ring. I said, "Tyler." He was prepared. I could hear it in the first breath. The kind of breath a person takes when they've been practicing an opening statement, when they've been working up to something for days and finally have the other person on the line. "Dad," he exhaled. "Dad, listen. I need you to listen to me." "Okay," I said. His voice was tight, controlled in the way a person is controlled when they're holding a script in their head. "This notice, what Arthur sent, this isn't how you handle something like this. You don't just send legal paperwork to your own son. That's not. We could have talked about this. You should have called me first. You should have come to the house." I let him continue. "I know about the Airbnb, okay? I know you found the listing. We were going to tell you. We talked about telling you like 4 times. It happened kind of fast. And Kayla had this idea for the LLC, and I thought you wouldn't." He stopped himself. "I thought it would be sorted by the time it mattered," he said. "That's all I thought." I didn't say anything. The thing about silence, real silence, the kind that's deliberate, is that it asks a question the other person has to answer for themselves. It doesn't accuse, it just waits. Tyler had been expecting something from me. Volume, maybe. Resistance. The version of his father who would match his energy, give him something to push against. A wall to lean on. I didn't give him that. "Dad, are you Say something. I'm here, I said. Keep going. He kept going. His voice was climbing now, the pitch rising the way it does when a person realizes the rehearsed version isn't working. You can't just, this is family, this is our house, the one you helped us buy. You think this is what that was about. You think we sat across from you with all that paperwork so you could send us legal notices 4 years later. I thought, 3.5 years, but I didn't say that. This is our home, Dad. Lucas's home. You realize that? You're doing this to Lucas's home. I registered that, the use of Lucas's name. I knew what it was. It was not manipulation. Not exactly. Tyler was scared, and scared people reach for whatever might be load-bearing. I didn't fault him for it. I just made a note of it, the way I make a note of everything. His voice cracked slightly on the next part. Not from emotion, but from the effort of maintaining a register that was already slipping. Dad, I'm trying to tell you, Kayla's been crying for 2 days. 2 days straight. I have never seen her like this. She never thought it would get to this point. She just… Tyler, I said. He stopped, one word. My voice at exactly the same volume it had been the whole time. The volume I used to tell a story. The volume I used when I read Tyler his bedtime stories, back when he was small enough to need them. That same voice. Tyler, did you tell Kayla I wouldn't check? A pause. Very small. Then, what? The text, I said, to Kayla. Did you tell her I wouldn't check? The line went quiet in a different way than it had been before. Not the quiet of someone gathering their next argument. The quiet of someone who has stepped on a plank and felt it give. I don't know what you're… You CC'd me on a bank statement in October, I said. You meant to forward it to Kayla. You got me instead. I scrolled up. Nothing. 3 words, Tyler. You told her I wouldn't check. I want to try to describe what it felt like to say those words, because it was different from what I'd expected. I had thought, in the 11 days between sending the notice and this call, that when the moment came there would be something sharp in it, something that cut. Instead, it was just the truth, stated out loud for the first time. And truth has a weight to it that sharpness doesn't. It doesn't slice, it lands. Tyler didn't say anything for a long time. I was still at my kitchen table. My pot roast was in front of me. I was holding my fork. I had not moved. You told her I wouldn't check, I said. I always check. I'm an engineer. It wasn't said in anger. I want that to be understood. There was no heat in it, no edge, no intention to wound. It was the most factual sentence I had spoken in 32 years of fatherhood. I am a man who read every page of a 47-page mortgage document before signing his name. I am a man who keeps column C for evidence. I am a man who counts the minutes he spends sitting in his car because he doesn't trust himself to act until he's done the math. I always check. It's not a virtue, it's just who I am. Dad. Tyler's voice came out smaller than I had ever heard it. Not smaller in the way a child's voice is small. Smaller in the way a man's voice is small when he has been found out completely and has nothing left to argue. Dad, 90 days, Tyler. I hung up. I set the phone face down on the table. I sat with both hands on either side of my plate, like I was steadying something. I have been asked, since Marlene asked, and I've asked myself, what I felt in that moment. People expect a certain answer, relief maybe, or the particular satisfaction of being proved right in a way you didn't want to be proved right. Some clean feeling that comes after the hard thing. It wasn't that. It was closer to what happens when you've been carrying a heavy bag on one shoulder for so long that you stop noticing the weight. You get used to the tilt, you compensate, and then you set the bag down, and suddenly you're standing straight and there's no triumph in it. You're just vertical again. You're just yourself again. And you stand there for a moment and you remember what it felt like before you picked it up. That's what it was. I sat at my kitchen table and I let the moment settle. And I didn't feel victorious, and I didn't feel grief. Those were going to come later, each in their own time. And I didn't feel certain I'd done the right thing, though I believed I had. I felt level. I felt like the man I'd been trying to stay throughout this whole process. The one who doesn't make decisions in the moment. The one who builds systems. The one who waits until the numbers are right before he puts his name on anything. Tyler had needed a father who would yell back. He had prepared for that version of me. I don't know what he was going to do with it. Maybe argue until we were both exhausted. Maybe cry. Maybe accuse me of things that had nothing to do with this. People do that when they're scared. They reach for anything in range, but I couldn't give him that. Not because I was withholding it, but because it isn't in me. I have never been the kind of man who performs his feelings for the benefit of the person who caused them. Whatever Tyler was carrying after that call, the scramble to call their realtor, to call the lender, to figure out what refinancing actually required, that was his to carry now. He was 32 years old. He had made choices. They had consequences. None of that made him a bad man. It just made him a man who had made bad choices. The difference matters. I stayed at that table for a while. Marlene called 40 minutes later. She has a sense for these things, always has. She called at 7:54 and I picked up and she said, "He called, didn't he?" "He called," I said, "and?" "It's done." I said what I needed to say. "Dennis," she paused and I could picture her in her kitchen, the way she leans against the counter when she's trying to figure out what to say. "How do you feel?" I thought about it. The honest answer, the one I'd been sitting with for 40 minutes. Like I set something down that I'd been carrying for a while, I said. A beat. Then Marlene quietly, "Good. That's good, Dennis." We stayed on the line for another 15 minutes and talked about her roses, which were doing well in their cold frames for late fall, and whether or not she should mulch them heavier before the first hard frost. I told her I didn't know enough about roses to have an opinion. She said that had never stopped me before. I told her she had a point. She laughed. I was glad to hear her laugh. When we hung up, I went back to the kitchen. I finished my dinner. It was cold. I ate it anyway. There is something clarifying about eating a cold meal you reheated before a difficult phone call. The phone call is over. The meal is still there. The world did not stop to accommodate the weight of what just happened. Not the dinner, not the evening, not anything. It just continued. I ate the pot roast. I washed my plate. I turned off the kitchen light. In 11 days, or 61 days, or some number of days I didn't yet know, Arthur would call me with a number, and my name would come off a piece of paper, and I would have to figure out what to do with everything that meant. But that was then. This was Tuesday evening at 7:54, and the dishes were done, and the kitchen was quiet, and I had said what I needed to say. They refinanced in 61 days, 29 days ahead of the deadline. Arthur called on a Wednesday morning. I was at my workbench when the phone rang. I had been sanding down a cabinet door for a project I had been putting off for 2 years, which is something I tend to do when I have too much patience left over and not enough to spend it on. The sanding could wait. The phone couldn't. "It's done," Arthur said. "They closed this morning. Lender confirmed." "Okay," I said. "I'll have the release ready for your signature by Thursday afternoon. You can come by the office." "I'll be there," I said. That was the whole conversation. Arthur is a man who understands that not everything requires expansion. He said what needed to be said, and then we said goodbye, and that was it. I set the phone on the workbench and stood there for a moment, looking at the cabinet door. Then I picked up the sandpaper and kept going. I had to finish what I started. Thursday afternoon, Arthur's office at Tokens, Measure Eunice, address Cardinal, 1247 Sycamore Street, 5th floor, preserve_order true, same office I'd sat in 3 months ago, the same afternoon light coming through the same west-facing windows, the same sycamores outside with their pale winter bark catching the low sun. Arthur's stack of files on the corner of his desk had shifted slightly, the way things shift in offices where real work gets done, but the wooden clock was where it always was, and the framed photograph of the two of us was still on the wall. Arthur was in his chair. I sat across from him. He slid the release document across the desk. 2 pages. My name, in several places, with lines beside each one. "Read it first," he said. He was smiling slightly when he said it. I read it. I read the words. Dennis Calloway is no longer a co-obligor on the mortgage note for the property at the Dublin, Ohio address. The lender had accepted the refinance and released all prior co-signers from any further obligation. The release was final and binding. There were effective dates and reference numbers and all the scaffolding that formal language requires. I read every word, naturally. Then I took the pen Arthur handed me, and I signed where it asked me to sign, and initialed where it asked me to initial, and handed it back. Arthur countersigned, dated it, set it in a fresh folder. "Congratulations," he said. Not warmly exactly, just correctly, the way you say congratulations to someone who has finished a difficult thing. "Thank you, Arthur," I said, "for everything." He waved it off the way old friends do. "Buy me dinner sometime." "I will," I said. I meant it. I walked out of his office into the afternoon and sat in my car for a moment before I started it. I have tried to identify precisely what the feeling was. It was not the feeling of winning. I have won things before, Arguments, bids on projects, the occasional card game with Marlene's husband. And winning has a particular temperature to it, a brief warmth, something that arrives and then begins to cool almost immediately. This was not that. It was the feeling of finishing, the feeling of having carried something from one end of a long project to the other, and setting it on the table, and stepping back, and looking at the whole span of it. Not pride, not satisfaction in the usual sense, just completion, the way an engineer feels when a bridge passes its final load test. Not surprise, not triumph, just, yes, that's what it was supposed to do, that's what it did. I sat in my car for a few minutes. My eyes went to the visor. Lucas's drawing was still there, a watercolor page from his art class. The one he'd showed me 8 weeks ago and I'd tucked up there without thinking, without meaning to make it anything. A house, drawn in the way 6-year-olds draw houses. Triangular roof, 4 windows, a door in the center, 2 figures standing in front that might have been people or might have been trees. He hadn't labeled it. I'd never asked him what it was. I looked at it for a while, not at Tyler, not at Kayla, not at the figure I'd spent the better part of 3 months building, the spreadsheet, the columns, the evidence, the attorney, the notice, the 90 days that had become 61. None of that was what I saw. Sitting in the parking lot on Sycamore Street on a Thursday afternoon in January, I saw a crayon drawing, slightly crooked in the visor, a kid's interpretation of something that mattered to him enough to put on paper. I started the car. I drive through the Dublin neighborhood every week, Thursdays, on the way to pick up Lucas from school. That route takes me past Tyler and Kayla's house. Their house now, just theirs, no cosigner, no old man's name on the deed, no obligation running in both directions. I passed it that Thursday afternoon, and I looked at it the way I'd looked at it every week for 3.5 years. The front porch, the driveway, the door Kayla had painted sage green, a color she had chosen herself, and that I had come to appreciate in the way you appreciate choices that belong to someone else. It looked the same. That's what surprised me. I had expected the house to look different once my name was off it, expected some visible change, the way a room looks different after you move a piece of furniture that's been in one spot so long you forgot it was something you chose. But the house looked exactly like it always had. Ordinary. A house on a quiet street in a suburb of Columbus, Ohio. The kind of place where you recognize your neighbors and maybe trust your family. I didn't slow down. I kept going. Lucas's school was 3 minutes farther north. That night, I sat at my desk for a while. Then I got out the frame. I used the same kind of frame. It was a simple thing. Black, thin profile, glass front. The kind you can find at any decent hardware store. Not decorative, not sentimental in the way people mean when they say sentimental. Just a frame that holds something in place and puts a border around it so you know where to look. I had bought a small stack of them years ago. 3 left in my workshop closet. I used one for a county service certificate I was given at retirement. I used one for Lucas's bridge drawing, the one he'd made at school and brought to the housewarming, and which I'd asked his permission to keep. He had said yes very seriously, as though a formal agreement was appropriate. I told him it was because it was. The third one I had been keeping, without thinking about it much, for something I hadn't identified yet. I took the refinance release documents out of the folder Arthur had given me and laid them on the work table in my workshop, not on the kitchen table. The workshop, where I go when I need to do something carefully. The release was 3 pages. The important part was on the first page, about 2/3 of the way down, a paragraph, plain language, confirming the cosigner obligation discharged, my name, the mortgage account number, the property address, a notarized signature from the lender. I had already read it twice at Arthur's office and once more at home the evening it arrived. I didn't need to read it again, but I read it again. Then I got out the frame. There's a particular kind of attention you bring to framing something. It's not the attention of reading or building. It's quieter than that. You're aligning, making sure the margins are even, making sure the glass is clean, making sure it will hang straight. I took my time with it. I always take my time with things like this. When it was done, I set it upright on the work table and looked at it for a while. I didn't say anything to myself. There wasn't anything to say. I found a padded envelope in the supply drawer, the kind with bubble wrap bonded to the inside. I wrapped the frame in tissue paper first, then slid it in. It fit with a little room, which was what I wanted. I didn't want it sliding around. Then I sat down at the work table with an index card and a pen, and I stayed there for about 2 minutes. I put the pen down. I put the index card back in the drawer. I sealed the envelope. I wrote Tyler's address on the front. His full name, the Dublin address. I wrote it in my regular handwriting, not printed. the same handwriting I use when I write things down in a system, when I want it to be legible for a long time. Where the return address goes, on the upper left, I left it blank. The Kaufman Road branch post office has a parking lot that is never quite big enough for how many people use it. And on a Thursday afternoon it runs about a 15-minute wait. I had been there in late October with the formal notice. A different envelope, different contents, different wait. The woman at window 3 had been working there both times. She had grey-streaked hair pulled back efficiently, and the manner of someone who processes 100 transactions a day without making any of them feel like a transaction. I had noticed that about her in October. I noticed it again now. She weighed the envelope and told me the postage. I paid with cash. She asked if there was anything fragile inside. I said there was glass, and she affixed a small fragile sticker to the lower corner of the envelope without comment, as if this were a perfectly ordinary request. It was, I suppose. She handed me the receipt. I thanked her. She was already looking at the next person. I went out through the glass door and crossed the parking lot to my car. I sat there for a moment, not the drive home this time. Just the walk to the car. That was enough. What I felt was something I'd been expecting, and something I hadn't been expecting, in roughly equal measure. The expecting part was the relief. The same relief as the signing, the same as setting something down. The not expecting part was smaller and harder to name. Not regret, not grief exactly. Something in the vicinity of both. A closed chapter still has weight, even when you're the one who closed it. I don't know if he understood. I know he kept it. I know because Marlene told me she saw it on his desk 3 months later. She had been over to pick something up for Tyler's birthday, and she'd noticed it, the frame, sitting upright on the corner of his desk. She didn't mention it to Tyler. She just told me. She called me on a Tuesday evening and said, "Dennis, he kept it." She didn't say anything else about it, which was the right call. I said I was glad to hear it. Then we talked about something else. I had a Sunday with Lucas that week. We went to the Science Museum downtown. He had been asking about the space exhibit for 2 months. There was a new installation about the mechanics of orbital trajectories, which I was genuinely interested in, and which Lucas wanted to see because there was a simulator where you could steer a rocket. He steered the rocket. I read the explanatory panels. We split a sandwich in the atrium at noon, and he told me about something his teacher had said about the solar system that he thought was wrong. He asked me if he was right to think it was wrong. I told him to describe what the teacher had said. He described it. He was right that it was wrong. I told him so. He looked satisfied in the specific way he gets when an adult confirms that he was paying attention. We stayed until the museum closed. On the drive home, Lucas was quieter than usual. Not sad, just full in the way children get after a day of absorbing things. I had the radio on low. The light was going and the highway was easy, the kind of drive where you don't have to think about the road. Lucas asked me on the drive home if I was okay. I told him I was. I meant it. Lucas asked me the question I'd been expecting for 6 months. Not dreading, expecting, which is a different thing. Dread has an edge to it. What I'd been carrying was something closer to patience. I knew the question was coming, because Lucas is the kind of child who notices things and holds onto them, quietly, until the right moment. He doesn't forget. He just waits. He gets that from somewhere. I don't know where. It was a Sunday in late January. We had been doing Sunday afternoons together since the fall. His parents dropped him at my house after his Saturday soccer game, and I kept him until dinner. We had built a routine the way you build anything worth having, without deciding to, through repetition and small agreements that didn't need to be said aloud. In September, the routine had included going inside, kitchen table, homework, something to eat, sometimes a project if he had one. Through October and November, I had shifted it gradually, the way you shift a load without announcing the shift. We started meeting on the porch. His parents pulled up. He came out. We stayed outside. In the cold weather, I put 2 chairs on the covered section and brought out hot chocolate. Lucas had not commented on this. He had noticed it though. I knew he'd noticed it because he's 7 years old, and he is one of the most observant people I have ever encountered in 57 years of encountering people. He had not said anything. He had simply gotten used to the porch and appeared to like it there, which made the question, when it finally came, feel less like an accusation and more like an inquiry. Which was what it was. We had been sitting on the porch for about 40 minutes, reading. He had a library book about deep-sea creatures that he'd checked out twice already without finishing because he kept stopping to think about things. Next to his chair was another one he'd brought from home. Something about bridge engineering with a bright red suspension bridge on the cover, dog-eared at a chapter on cable tension. He hadn't opened it yet. He was still on the deep-sea creatures when he closed the book on his finger to mark his place and said, without particular urgency. "Grandpa, why don't you come inside anymore?" I looked at him. He was looking at me with that particular 7-year-old directness that has no social filter on it. No awareness that a question might be uncomfortable, no hesitation about asking it. He wasn't upset, he was genuinely curious. He wanted to know the thing, and he had calculated that I was the right person to ask. I felt the weight of the question fully, and I did not rush past it. I thought about what to say. I could have said something vague. "The porch is nice. I like the air. It's good weather for sitting outside." He would have accepted that, probably. He's polite. But it would have been an evasion, and I am not in the habit of evading things when I have a better option. And with Lucas, I always try to have a better option. He deserves the truth in the form a 7-year-old can hold. I thought for another moment. Then I said, "I do come inside. I'm just more careful about which doors I walk through." Lucas looked at this answer seriously. He turned it over the way he turns over ideas. You can see it happening, see him evaluating. He looked out at the yard for a second, then back at me. He said, "Like how you check if a door hangs right." I sat very still for a moment. I hadn't thought about that in months. The guest room door at the back of the house, the gap at the top, the frame that had settled unevenly, Tyler waving it off. The realtor said it was cosmetic. Me noting it anyway, the way I note everything, storing it in whatever part of the mind keeps these observations, not sure at the time what to do with it. I had mentioned it once in passing to Lucas, as we walked down that hallway together on some ordinary Sunday 8 months ago. He had been 7 then too, his birthday is in November, and I hadn't known if he'd absorbed it or let it go. Children do both, unpredictably. He had absorbed it. He had held it in his particular patient way and brought it out now, on a porch in January, in the form of a question that was also an answer. I looked at my grandson. I said, "Exactly like that." He considered this, nodded once, the way he does when he has filed something satisfactorily. Then he opened his book again and went back to the deep-sea creatures.